Hi, I thought today I might show you how we might make a fairly quick sort of a gift. At this time of year we're often looking for gifts, but any time of the year works really well for a gift for me. These are little things that I have made which have got a grippy surface on one side, which is great for opening jars and things. Sometimes we buy a jar in the supermarket and we can't get into it, and how frustrating is that? We've got this jar full of good stuff, can't get it open. This is just grippy stuff that you can get. This is my jar lid, so you're going to use the grippy stuff against it, and that will help you grip it to be able to open it. Hopefully in all cases it will help you open it even if it's really tough. So the grippy stuff is a product that you can get in shops that sell household type wares for lining drawers, if you might wanting to keep glasses or cups or tools or anything, just to stop things sliding around. You can get it in various stores like that. It might come in white, it might come in an off-white, it might come in grey, it might be black. There's a few little options, and it may not look quite like this. It may have a different makeup in the way it's made, but basically it's a non-slip surface type product that you can get probably on a roll, maybe a smaller roll than that one, all sorts of things. So I thought that they were kind of fun. I've put a little loop so that you can hang it in the kitchen if that's what you'd like to do, or you might want to you might have something where you want to hang something with a magnetic surface, so I've put a magnet in there as well so that you can hang it up with a magnet. So I think that's a great option, but it is an option. You don't have to have a magnet. That's purely optional. I just thought it was kind of fun to include it. So I've been making some of these. As you can see, I've got this whole stack of little gifts for some people this year, and I just thought you might like to see how to do that too. So what I've got here to make it is quite simple. 2 squares of fabric and a square of the grippy stuff and a little strip of ribbon. So I've cut my squares 7 inches square, because I know that out of a width of fabric you can get 6 7-inch squares. So that means you could make 3 of these from one strip of fabric, from a 7-inch strip. Today I'm just going to make one. So I've got my 2 squares of fabric, and I've got my square also 7 inches of my grippy stuff, and I've got a strip of ribbon which is also 7 inches. Seems like a good thing to me. So to make it really quite simple, you know how to cut a square of fabric. I've got my square of grippy, so I'm laying my first piece of fabric down with the right side up. And it wouldn't have to be a fancy fabric. You could use something behind. You don't see a lot of it in behind there, but it's kind of nice to have something in there. And then so I'm going to lay that on top, again with the right side. If there's a right and a wrong side, or a preferred side is the right side, lay it with the wrong side against the right side of your fabric, because that's going to live there, and that's how you're going to see this piece here. So then I'm going to suggest that you have your piece of ribbon, which you've cut 7 inches long, fold it in half. And I've used a reasonably wide ribbon here. It's probably about 5/8 of an inch wide. It doesn't really matter. You could make it out of fabric if you wanted to. I'm just going to pin that to one corner. So I'm just going to pin it here so that it's across the corner, so that the points of the ribbon are sticking out beyond the square there. And I'm just going to put a pin in just to hold it in place so that when we stitch it, it knows where it belongs. And then with my other square, we're going to pop that right sides together. So this stuff is kind of like a rubbery type product. I don't actually know what it's made of. But it's fine to go through the sewing machine. It doesn't seem to bother it at all. So I'm just going to lay that right sides together. You may want to put a couple of pins or clips on to hold that. And then I'm just going to stitch around with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I'm going to leave a gap of maybe 3 inches, 2 to 3 inches, so that you can turn it through. Don't leave the gap too small, because you've got this grippy stuff in there. It kind of grips against itself when you're trying to turn it. So not too small a hole, because it makes it harder to turn. And I'm just going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to do my 1/4 inch seam all the way around. So I'm just sewing with my 1/4 inch seam. Now I should just mention I've also done a slightly longer stitch than normal. Normally this machine stitches with a 2.5 size stitch, and I've made it a size 3 stitch, just a little bit longer for no particularly good reason. It doesn't matter. So I've sewn up to where I know that I'm going to stitch onto the ribbon underneath there, and I'm going to pivot just there. So I'm just going to lift my foot but leave my needle down and stitch across the corner where the ribbon is. And so I'm going to stitch right across there and then back on itself, just to give it a little bit of extra strength for that hanging loop. again leaving the needle down and pivoting to come straight along this edge now. So we've got a little angled corner there. And then I'm just coming all the way around now with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just make sure your edges are staying nicely together. And pivoting at the corners. You could make seasonal ones, use some really delicious Christmassy fabrics. You could make some fun ones. These are kind of fun ones. You could make them out of fruit and veggie type fabrics. Or you could just make a whole lot of them. Okay, I'm on the last, coming up to the last corner now, and I'm going to pivot. And remember, you're leaving a 2 to 3 inch gap. So we started over here, so we're going to stop about here. And I am using a little reverse when I start and stop, just to hold that nice and firm. Okay, so I can take my pin out now. And I'm just going to suggest that you clip the corners. If we just clip across the corners, it just helps the corner sit out just a little bit more nicely than it might, especially with that layer of that rubbery stuff in there as well. You won't get a super sharp corner, but you'll get one that's pretty reasonable. And across this corner where the ribbon is, because we've sewn it at an angle, I'm just going to trim that off at an angle as well. And now we're going to turn that out the right way. And we're nearly done. Now when you turn it out the right way, make sure that you're pulling it out the right bit, because you've got 3 layers there and it would be quite easy to pull it out through the wrong bit. You've got the wrong side of your rubbery bit against the right side there. So you want to go in here, and you'll be able to tell because your ribbon that you've sewn in will be in the layer that you're pulling out through. I tend to like to pull from the opposite corner because it's probably the hardest bit to pull first, but you can pull the ribbon through first if that's what you'd rather do. So you can see it's a little bit grippy, but that's okay. So we're going to turn it out the right way. Now ribbon's poking out there, which is exactly what we're after. So you can just pull on the ribbon to get that corner so that you get a nice angle across there where the ribbon is. But the other 3 corners, you just need to push those out so that you get something resembling a nice corner there. And then I'm going to suggest that we just give it a quick press, because I'm going to machine stitch the opening closed. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to hand sew through that rubbery bit there, but you could if that's what you wanted to do. But I have found that I can do them by machine, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to iron it on the fabric side. I'm not sure what happens if you iron that with the iron. I haven't tried ironing that with an iron. On this side you can iron it, and I have found that there's been no problem at all. Just making sure that your seams are sitting out nice and straight. Now the other thing would be, if you're not too sure about that sort of thing, is using one of these Teflon mats, because that helps protect what it is that you're ironing. It does mean you can't get at the seams so well, but it does give you a layer of protection if you're not too sure about ironing directly when you've got a different product in there. But I'm finding that I'm not actually ironing the product, I'm just on the edges here. Now the edge here, where we've got our little opening, we want to make sure that it's folded in the full 1/4 inch of our seam allowance there. So you might want to just press that little bit in there so that you get a nice edge there. Again, being careful not to iron this, and then you may want to tuck that in, and you might want to pop a pin in there just to hold that edge together, so that when we stitch around by machine, it's all held nicely together for you. So I think now I can go ahead and do the rest of the machining, so everything's looking pretty good. However, if we want to put a magnet in it, I would suggest that you pop that in before you stitch it closed, because otherwise you have to open it up again. I am going to put a magnet in, and I'm just going to let it float around at the moment. So these are just little magnets you can get in like craft supply places. I'm not really sure where exactly. Pop it inside and let it float around at the moment. but I am going to suggest that we stitch it into a corner. But if you get it inside there and just let it sit in the middle somewhere, back to your sewing machine, and we're going to stitch all the way around the edge now, including the little opening that we had, and then we're going to create a little pocket for that magnet. But the magnet is of course optional. So I'm going to the sewing machine now. So I'm going to have the rubbery stuff up, and I'm going to be sewing a little bit less than 1/4 inch because I want to make sure that I catch everything in on the open bit there. So just starting just before the opening, and again I just use that little back stitch and then stitching through. So this is stitching through fine. My jewel feed is probably helping it through a little bit. If you haven't got a jewel feed and you're finding it's gripping, I would suggest that what you could do would be to just find a regular piece of paper or a piece of tissue paper, turn this up the other way and have that underneath it, so that, I'll show you in a minute. We'll go around and do this bit first. So up to the corner, pivot across your angled corner there. So we're just going all the way around at the moment, near the edge. It hasn't taken very long to make this. If your magnet's wandering around, just slide it back into the centre again. And here we are, nearly back at the beginning again, and do a little back stitch just to seal that stitching off, and we're nearly done. However, I'm going to do the next bit as if you didn't have your jewel feed and it was gripping a bit for you. So what we've got now is a nicely stitched, nicely edged holder thing, and we've got a magnet floating around in there. So I'm going to suggest that you might push it up to the corner where the loop is, and that we're going to stitch a corner across here that will keep the magnet in the corner. This isn't essential, but I think it's kind of nice, so that then if you're hanging it by the magnet, it looks like it's up the right way and it's out of your way if you're trying to use it and things like that. So if normally I would probably just stitch it this way up, just come across at an angle there, but because I wanted to show you how you might manage if this is gripping everything too badly, if you turn it up the other way, make sure that your magnet's in the corner there, and you want to just do a diagonal line. You might want to mark the line. I'm just going to make a rough guess here. Make sure that when you're sewing, your sewing line is far enough away that your foot on your machine won't run into the magnet. So you want to be stitching 1/2 inch or so away from where the magnet is sitting. And I'm just putting the piece of paper behind to show you how you might manage if everything's gripping for you and it's too hard to sew otherwise. So I'm just doing a little back stitch and just stitching right across that corner. It's just creating a little holding pocket for the magnet. It keeps it nice and tight. It also helps just hold together because we're not really holding all those layers together, and it's just another little thing that does help with that. So now I've got this nice piece of paper attached here, but you'll find that that should just tear off where your stitching is because you've perforated the paper with the stitching, and then you can just pull that other half out, and there you've got it. If the paper's being a little bit stubborn, you can spray it with a little bit of water to dampen it and soften the paper, and then it will tear away a little bit more easily if that's something you need to do. Trim off any loose threads, and you've got a wonderful gift made in a jiffy, ready to open all those delicious jars of something particularly delicious. And we've got a whole lot of them here ready as gifts. How quick was that? You too can make a gift in a hurry if that's what you need to do, and a useful gift at that too. So you could go ahead and just give that a quick press again if that's what you wanted to do, but other than that, it's pretty much ready to go. Enjoy making your little jar lid opener.